I have found a friend in Jesus, he's everything to me. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. The lily of the valley, in him alone I see all I need to cleanse and make me fully whole. In sorrow he's my comfort, in trouble he's my stay. He tells me every care on him to roll. He's a lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul.
The lily of the valley, that's a way that the Bible describes that which is most precious to us. So let's think about, is Jesus precious to us? We determine that in our own hearts, and it is borne out in the way we live our lives. Talking about the pathway to death. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24, "This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, "But exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin." Pathway to death sounds like kind of a dark topic, and it is, but it's not something that is out of the realm of possibility. It is something that is very real, and it's something that all of us are going to have to battle against. The pathway to death is, it's not like it takes much effort to get on it, okay? It's easy to get on the pathway of death. As Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, the way that leads to destruction has a wide gate and a broad way, and there are many that go in by that way. So I think it's important that we identify that way. And today we're going to be discussing the ideas of desire and temptation. Now, those are two separate things. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to get those things mixed up, twisted, overlapping, and things like that. And they don't. The thing is, we need to keep these things pigeonholed in their own separate place. While one may lead to the other, while there may be, some connections, they are two separate things. And so let's talk about desire and temptation and how all of this fits into this pathway to death. It doesn't have to, by the way. We can do things the way the Lord asks, and we can stay off this pathway that leads to death. So that's the reason we want to study things like this. Let's start out by thinking about the idea of desire. And I would just suggest that God has put within each of us certain desires. I don't think anyone could deny that. If I set you down in a room and closed the door and locked you there, it wouldn't be long, just probably a matter of hours at the most, that you would begin to see these desires that God has put within you begin to surface. For example, let's think about one of the most basic of desires, and that's hunger. Hunger happens because the way God has made our bodies is they need to be fueled. They're fueled by food, and they have to be refueled as that food is converted into energy and then we get rid of it as waste. That process has to constantly happen. And so that means constantly taking in new resources of food. And the way that we know that it's time to do that is God has put within us hunger. And so just give you a quick example of that over in Matthew chapter 12. And really, hunger is not the subject of what's going on here, but it happens. So in Matthew 12, it says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. Now, of course, that leads to a very interesting interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees, but that's not what we're concerned with in this particular study. All I want to point out right now is that at that time, his disciples were hungry. They had that feeling within them that their body needed refueled. And so that is called hunger, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat, because they knew eating was the way that you get rid of that hunger feeling and give the body what it needs to keep going. Okay? That's hunger. God puts that within us. I've never met anybody that doesn't get hungry. Now, maybe there's some disorder out there or disease or something that would cause a person not to experience hunger. I don't know. Sometimes I wish I had just a little bit of that, but it seems like I'm always hungry. But anyway, I've never met anyone that doesn't experience hunger. It's as natural to us as breathing. And so that's a natural desire that's put within us. Might just have you look at a couple other passages real quickly. For example, in Matthew chapter 15 and in verse 32, it says there, now Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they've now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. So I think Jesus recognized hunger as a natural thing, and his compassion was he didn't want people to be hungry, especially on his account, because they came to listen to him. He didn't want them to go away hungry, needing to be refueled. So he wants to take care of that, and of course he does. This is the place where he feeds about 4,000 people, I believe it is, on that occasion. But the impetus for that was he didn't want them to be hungry. Also over in Matthew chapter 21 and in verse 18, we read there, now in the morning as he returned to the city, he was hungry. Now this is the account of Jesus. So we have the disciples being hungry, Jesus having compassion on crowds because they were hungry, and then finally, Jesus is hungry. Hunger is a universal thing. If you're human, you hunger. All right, that's just the way it is. So that is a desire that God has put within us. It has a purpose. Another desire that I'll bring up is the sexual desire that God puts within man. And that's nothing to be, we're not being vulgar here. We're not being untoward. That's simply a desire that God has put within man for a reason. We find out there's a reason for that. And it's interesting over in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy chapter 21, I believe it is. Yes, Deuteronomy 21, beginning in verse 10, he says to his people Israel, God says, when you go out to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hand and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman and desire her and would take her for your wife, then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and trim her nails. She put off the clothes of her captivity, remain in your house, mourn for her father and her mother a full month. After that, you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. So God recognized that among the Israelites, even as they looked out among those that they took captive, there was a desire, a sexual desire within them that could be aroused by beauty. And he said that's okay. That can happen as long as you take care of it the way that you're supposed to. You know, when you're hungry, what do? You eat. When you desire this woman, this is the way you are supposed to handle that. And then it'll be a husband and wife relationship. That's the natural desire, and that's the way that you take care of it. And of course, we find out there is a very good reason for that desire, and that's number one, procreation. There's a lot of other things that are beautiful and benefits of the husband-wife relationship and of the sexual relationship. But the one of the primary things that we see is procreation, as we talked about in an earlier study in Genesis chapter 4. Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore a son and called his name Cain, saying, I've gotten a man from the Lord. So that's the way that all takes place. Now, I want to talk to you about temptation. I've used up way too much time, but maybe we can quickly look at the relationship between desire and temptation. If desire is a natural thing that God puts within us, temptation is the process of where Satan tries to place us in situations where it appears that satisfying a desire will require breaking the law of God. Now, we've seen that if you're hungry, you can eat. That breaks no laws of God. If you desire a woman, you can be with her. If you do it the way God says, you've broken no laws of God. But what Satan tries to do is says, yeah, I know God said that, but look at this. You can do it this way, and perhaps it'll be even more satisfying. Let's see how that plays out as far as hunger. We talked about you get hungry. There's a natural way that God approves of to satisfy that hunger. But what happens when Satan gives us the temptation to satisfy that desire another way? Well, for example, over in Matthew chapter 11, verses 18 and 19, Jesus makes this comment. John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is justified by her children. Now, basically what Jesus is saying there is there's no pleasing you people. John had a Nazirite vow. There were certain things that he didn't eat or drink, certain things about his hair and his clothes. That didn't satisfy you. And the Son of Man looked much more like you. He ate and drank like you, and you've still found a way to reject him. But one of the specific things he talks about there is you say, look, a glutton and a winebibber. Those two things, a glutton and a winebibber, represent people who allow Satan to tempt them into trying to circumvent God's laws. A glutton is one who doesn't just eat, he overeats, and he lets eating be a satisfaction and almost an idol to him, because eating becomes what he lives his life for. Everything works around the eating. That's a glutton. And so you've got the way to satisfy hunger the way God says, and then you've got the overeating and putting eating in a different category and allowing eating to be a god. That is Satan's doing, where he tempts and people give in to the temptation. In Proverbs 28 and verse 7, the wise man says about that, whoever keeps the law is a discerning son, but a companion of gluttons shames his father. Glutton is the one who tries to circumvent God's law. Well, let's think about real quickly the sexual desire. I think we've shown that God puts that within man, and he gives man the proper way to satisfy that. We could cite a lot more scripture on the way that God tells us to satisfy those sexual desires. But what about one who tries to circumvent that? And the only reason we would do that is because we're allowing Satan to tempt us to do that. Over in Matthew chapter 15 and verses 19 and 20, We read there, for Jesus says, out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. So Jesus' point is sin begins in the heart. And one of the sins that he mentions there is fornications. Fornications are those sexual activities that take place outside of the realm of the way God has given to satisfy the sexual desires. And so that's where Satan tempts, and we give in to those temptations. Satan says, hey, this is another way, perhaps even a more satisfying way that you can quench your sexual hunger. For example, over in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and in verse 3, Paul says there to the Thessalonians, this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. So you see the great contrast there, those who possess their vessel in sanctification and honor versus those who engage in sexual immorality, who allow their lust to run unbridled. And so there's kind of a quick look at desire and temptation. And of course, we talked here about giving in to that temptation. Now, the next time, the Lord willing, we want to talk about the idea of lust and get into sin, perhaps even into lasciviousness, or as the New King James puts it, licentiousness. But I hope you're beginning to see the pattern and some distinction here. Desire it's not wrong to have desire if it's a God-given desire. Now, if your desire is to satisfy your sexual craving in a way that God hasn't given his approval to, then that is no longer just desire. It's allowing temptation to move that desire in a different direction. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that I'm making the distinction the way the Bible does there. You want to talk more about that or some other Bible subject, be sure and leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. Use Facebook Messenger. Send an email to us. We'd be glad to talk to you more about these things. And, hey, you want to get into more studies like this and hear some great sermons from the Word of God, sing together, pray together. We want to always encourage you to come and be a part of our gatherings at Stone Ridge Church of Christ. We meet at 514 Airport Road. We meet on Sundays at 10, 11, and 6. Wednesdays at 7 p.m. for Bible study, and you're always invited. There's never a time that you're not invited. So come and be with us. Hey, until next time, if the Lord allows us to have another opportunity, and He allows us life, I hope that you all have a great day, that you will recognize your God-given desires, and that you will always satisfy those desires in the God-given, God-approved way.
Oh, He all my griefs has taken, and all my sorrows borne. In temptation He's my strong and mighty tower. I have all for Him forsaken, and all my idols torn from my heart, and now He keeps me by His power. Though all the world forsake me, and Satan tempt me sore, through Jesus I shall safely reach the goal. He's a lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's a fairest of 10,000 to my soul.